We're going to be graphing systems of inequalities. You know how to graph inequalities, but we're going to add a little twist, and we're going to graph systems of inequalities, which basically means we're going to be graphing two inequalities on the same piece of graph paper. But before we do that, let's go ahead and review some things that we should already know. If you look at the top of the box there, that big box, they give us four different scenarios that we're going to come across here. Notice that all of them that we're working with right now are going to be in slope-intercept form, which is going to make things a little easier for us, slope-intercept form. Now, since we are working with inequalities, we need to be careful because sometimes the lines we use will be dotted, sometimes they will be solid, depending on what kind of inequality we're given. We're also going to have to do some shading. Sometimes we shade to the top, sometimes we shade to the bottom of the line. All right, so let's start with the line. What kind of line do we have for each one of these examples? So if you look at this first example, they give me a greater than symbol. Anytime I see a greater than symbol with no equal sign on it, then we should be using a dotted line. So in that first box, put down dot. That's the kind of line we would use for this particular inequality. You look at the second example, this one is a less than symbol. Again, no equal sign, which means that we would also use a dotted line for this one as well. And the last two, notice how the last two do have the equal sign on it, and because of that equal sign, we should be using a solid line. So this is just a little review of those inequalities that we've already done. Matter of fact, we did this back in Algebra 1. Along with those dotted and solid lines, you're going to have to do some shading. So if you look at the first one up here, greater than. Anybody remember where to shade when it says greater than? Top or bottom? Top. That is correct. Top. When it's greater than, we shade to the top. Of course, if it says less than, we would be shaded to the bottom. Now, these two down here are the same thing. If it has a greater than, we'd shade to the top. If it says less than, we'd shade to the bottom. Now, over there on the far right column there, they want us to illustrate what this would look like. So we're going to give a real quick example. Here's some graph paper. First graph paper. And now we're just going to graph an example of each one of these, what it would look like. So this first one here says that it's a dotted line. So here's my dotted line. It also says that we would be shading to the top of that line. So shading to the top would be something like this right here. So this is an example of inequality using the greater than symbol. Now we're going to do an example of a less than. All right, so again, notice we said we were going to use a dotted line. Only difference is this one would be shaded to the bottom of the line. And that shading is the important part because that's where all of our solutions are. The other two are pretty much the same thing. The only difference is these are solid lines. Both of those are solid lines. First one says greater than, which means we'd be shading to the top. And the last one, less than, is shaded to the bottom. So again, that shading is the important part. That's where all the solutions are to the inequality. All right, so that's just a little quick review over the rules on graphing inequalities. Now let's take a look at an example here. Here's our first example. Y is less than or equal to 2x minus 3. Still not a system, this is just review. Notice they gave it to us in slope-intercept form. So out here on the right side, there's four boxes that we're going to fill in first. The slope. What is the slope of this line here? 2. So put it in the first box. The Y-intercept. The Y-intercept is a -3. The next box, they want to know what kind of line are you going to use? You're going to use a dotted line or are you going to use a solid line? This one we're going to use a, which one? Has the equal sign, so we should be using a solid line. And the last thing we have is the shading. It says less than, and anytime it says less than, we should be shaded to the bottom. All right, so I've got all my information. Now I'm ready to start graphing this thing here. So -3, that's the Y-intercept. So we'll start by putting the dot at -3. The slope, that's 2. However, since slope is defined as rise over run, I'm going to write it as 2 over 1, which means I'm going to rise 2, run 1, rise 2, run 1, rise 2, run one. Remember, the more dots we have, the more accurate the line's going to be. I'm going to get one more dot here at the bottom. I'm going down 2, 1 to the left. Don't get in a hurry. Make sure you're using the right kind of line. This one we said we were going to use a solid line, so I'll go ahead and connect these dots with a solid line. And all I have left to do now is the shading. And we said we were going to shade to the bottom, so let's go ahead and do that. There it is. Shaded to the bottom. So again, the solutions are the ordered pairs that fall within the shaded area. Those are the only ordered pairs that would make this inequality true. As a matter of fact, if it falls on top of the line, it would also make the inequality true. All right, so there's your first example. Let's take a look at one more here. We got y is greater than negative 2/3 x plus 3. Same 4 things we're looking for here. Slope. Slope is negative 2/3. The y-intercept is 3. What kind of line do we need to use on this one though? This one's a dotted line. And the shading, it says greater than, so we should be shading to the top. Shaded to the top. All right, let's graph it, see what it's going to look like. Positive 3 is the y-intercept. The slope is negative 2/3, so we're going to go down 2, 3 to the right, down 2, 3 to the right. We'll get one more dot on the other side by reversing the pattern, going up 2, 3 to the left. Now remember, guys, we said we were going to use a dotted line, so make sure we have a dotted line. We also said we were going to shade to the top, so go ahead and shade to the top. All right, so this is the graph of y is greater than negative 2/3 x plus 3. Again, all the order pairs that fall within the shaded area represent the solution. So there's lots and lots and lots of answers. So Annika, if I ask you 0, 0, is 0, 0 a solution to that inequality? No. Why not? That's right, because it's not in the shaded area. Only the points that are in the shaded area are solutions. All right, let's keep moving on here. Now, the 2 examples that I just gave you were in slope-intercept form. That is not always the case. Sometimes we have to rewrite them so that they are in slope-intercept form. But if you'll notice there, it says, remember, when solving an inequality, if you blank, you must blank. If you blank, you must blank. Anybody know what those are, those 2 blanks? When you're working with inequalities, if you blank, you must blank. If you what? All right, if you divide by negatives, what do you got to do? Switch the sign. All right, so that's what we need. Actually, it's if you multiply or divide. Either one of those. If you multiply or divide by a negative, multiply or divide by negative, you must flip the inequality. If you multiply or divide by negative, you must flip the inequality. In other words, if it's greater than, you got to flip it over to make it a less than. But that's only if you multiply or divide by a negative number. All right, so let's take a look at number 3 here. Notice it's in standard form. We're going to change that. We're going to start off by moving the 10x to the other side, and we're going to subtract. So now we got 5y is greater than negative 10x plus 4. So I move the 10x over first, subtract. Next thing I'm going to do is divide everything by 5, y by itself. So a negative 10 divided by 5 would end up giving me a negative x. 40 divided by 5, 40 divided by 5 is going to be a 8. Now, do I need to flip the sign on this one? No. No, I didn't divide it by a negative number. I divided by a positive 5. So now I've got this inequality in my slope-intercept form, which is what I want. Now that I have it in that slope-intercept form, let's go ahead and answer these 4 questions down at the bottom. What's the slope? What's the y-intercept? What kind of line are we going to use? And what kind of shading are we going to do? Go ahead and fill in those 4 at the bottom. All right, Gary, what goes in those 4 boxes? Start with slope. -2. What about the y-intercept? 8. What kind of line? Dotted. And what kind of shape? And top. All right, so those are the 4 things we're going to need in order to graph it. Of course, we don't need to graph it. All we needed was the information. All right, let's go to number 4. Same thing. We want the y by itself. So I'm going to start by subtracting 3x from both sides. So now I got -2y is less than or equal to -3x plus 12. Start by moving the x. Now we're ready to divide by -2. A -3 divided by -2 gives me a decimal, and I don't want that decimal. I'm going to leave it a fraction. Of course, a negative divided by negative would be a +3/2. And 12 divided by -2 would be a -6. First, how about this one? Do we need to flip the sign on this one? Yes. Why are we flipping it? That's right, because we divided by -2. So here's our inequality. Now it's in slope-intercept form. Now we can fill out these 4 boxes down at the bottom. Slope. Slope is going to be the 3/2. The y-intercept is going to be the -6. What kind of line are we going to use here? Solid. That's because of the equal sign. And we're going to shade to the top. Remember, we did flip it around, so now we'll shade it to the top. All right, go ahead and do number 5 for me, see what you get. Number 5. Get it in slope-intercept form, and give me those 4 things at the bottom. All right, Cassie, why don't you come up here and show us your work? Show us your answer. Yeah. Show your steps. Give me your slope, your y-intercept, your line, and your shape. All right, so she's moved her x to the other side. She did that by adding. Dividing everything by 4. Nice. That is correct. All right, there you go. That is correct. Her slope-intercept form was y is less than 1/4 x minus 5. Slope was the 1/4. Y-intercept was -5. We should be using a dotted line since there is no equal sign. And it is shaded to the bottom. Very good. All right, so again, guys, I haven't really shown you anything new. You guys know how to work with those inequalities. Now we're going to get into the system part. And when I say system, basically now we're going to do 2 inequalities on the same piece of graph paper. Now, if you look right above that number 6, though, notice it says here, number 1, it says that we're going to lightly shade each individual inequality. So very lightly we're going to shade. Once we do the lightly shaded part, number 2 says we're going to heavily shade the regions where they overlap. Now, because we're going to be graphing 3, 4 inequalities, it may get a little bit tricky here. So I'm recommending if you have map colors or different color pens, it might make things easier for you to see. All right, so if you've got map colors or different color pens, you might want to pull those out. All right, so here we go. Number 6. I've got y is less than or equal to 3x minus 5. We're going to graph that. Here we go. -5. That's the y-intercept. That's our starting point. 3. That's our slope. Now, that needs to be a fraction, so I'm going to make it 3 over 1, which means we're going to rise 3, run 1. Up 3, over 1. Up 3, over 1. Before you connect the dots, double check what kind of line do we need. It's a solid line. And I also need a shade that says less than, so I should shade to the bottom. This would be the bottom. So lightly shade. Lightly. Not too dark. Very lightly shade. So there's your first one. Now I'm going to grab the second one in a different color. It'll make things a little bit easier to see. So if you have a different color, I recommend that you use that different color. Now we're going to graph y is greater than or equal to -1/2 x plus 2. So, +2. That's our y-intercept. There's your starter. -1/2. That's our slope. Meaning we're going to go down 1, 2 to the right. Down 1, 2 to the right. Down 1, 2 to the right. I'm going to get a couple more dots on the other side. I'm going to reverse it. Go up 1, 2 to the left. Up 1, 2 to the left. Up 1, 2 to the left. This is going to be another solid line. There's my solid line. However, notice this one says greater than, and anytime it says greater than, we're going to shade to the top. So again, very lightly, we're going to shade to the top of that line we just made. There it is. Shade to the top of the line. Now here's the important part for us. What we're looking for is the region where they overlap. So what we're going to do is we're going to darken in this area right here. This is where the solutions are at. Where those two colors meet is where the solutions to this system of inequalities would be. So that's the part you're going to darken in for. That's the part I'm going to be looking for when I grade this. That's all the ordered pairs that would satisfy both inequalities. So when we graph systems of inequalities, we're looking for where do they overlap. That's the important part. All right, so that takes care of number 6. Now, if you look at number 7, this time they've given us 3 inequalities. So now we're going to graph 3 of them. So if you look at the first one here, notice it's not in the slope-intercept form. So we're going to fix that real quick. Notice the x is on the wrong side. It should be over here on the right side. So I'm going to subtract it, making it -x plus 3. There's the slope-intercept form. Now we're ready to graph that. +3. That's our y-intercept. -1. That's our slope. So I'm going to go down 1, 1 to the right. Down 1, 1 to the right. Down 1, 1 to the right. More dots, the better. Get a couple more dots over here by reversing it. Up 1, 1 to the left. Up 1, 1 to the left. Don't get in a hurry. What kind of line do we need on this one? Solid or dotted? Dotted. There is no equal sign, so we're going to use a dotted line. Then we're going to lightly shade to the bottom. It says less than, so shade to the bottom. Again, very lightly. Very light. So there's the first one. I'm going to grab a different color and graph the second inequality. Y is less than or equal to 2x plus 3. All right, so here we go. +3, +3. That's our y-intercept. The slope on that thing is 2, or 2 over 1. So we're going to go up 2, 1 to the right. Need more dots, so I'm going to reverse it. Go down 2, 1 to the left. down 2, 1 to the left, down 2, 1 to the left. It does have an equal sign on it, so I'm going to make a solid line. There it is. It says less than, so I'm going to shade to the bottom. This is the bottom. Again, do the shading light, very lightly shade. That's the second. Now we can't stop there because we do have a third inequality. If you have a third color, use a third color. It shows up a little bit better. What we're going to graph is y is greater than or equal to -3. Now notice there's no x on this, which means we have a slope of 0. Anytime we have a slope of 0, we end up getting a horizontal line. So it's got to go through -3. Let's see if we can find it here. -3 would be right here. I'm going to draw a horizontal line. This horizontal line should be a solid line. And because it says greater than, I'm going to shade to the top of that line. Starting to look like a big old mess here. So there it is. Again, very light. Now we got to go in there and see if we can find the part where all three colors overlap. And wherever that section is, that's the part we're going to darken in. Looking for all three colors that overlap. If you look closely, that part is going to be this little triangle that's right in the middle. This is where all three colors meet. So all of our solutions are going to be within this little triangle in the middle of our graph. Those are the ordered pairs that satisfy all three of these inequalities. That's why I said it's a little easier to see it if you use three different colors. You can still do it with the light, but it just makes things a little easier. All right, so on that one we have three inequalities. Same thing on number 8 here. We're going to have three inequalities again. Of course, that first one is not in slope-intercept form, so I'm going to have to do a little work here. I'm going to take that first inequality and get it into slope-intercept form. So I'm going to start by subtracting the 3x. And then from there, I'll go ahead and divide by 2. -3 over 2 can't be reduced, so I'll just leave it -3/2. 12 divided by 2 is a 6. So here's what we're going to be working. That's the first inequality. That's the slope-intercept form. +6 way up here is our starting point. That's our y-intercept. -3 over 2. Going to go down 3, 2 to the right, down 3, 2 to the right, down 3, 2 to the right. Now notice this inequality does not have an equal on it, so we're going to use a dotted line. It says less than, which means we're going to shade to the bottom. Very lightly shade to the bottom. Very lightly. And that takes care of the first inequality. The second inequality we have is y is less than or equal to 2x minus 1. So this was already in slope-intercept form, so we're ready to start graphing this. -1, that's our y-intercept. 2, that's our slope. So we're going to rise 2, run 1, up 2, over 1, up 2, over 1. Going to get a couple more dots over here, going down 2, 1 to the left, down 2, 1 to the left. This one does have an equal sign, so we're going to use a solid line. And it says less than would be should be shaded to the bottom. There it is. There's the second one. The third one we have here is x is greater than or equal to 0. Now Now this time it's the y that's missing. And when that y is missing, we have an undefined slope. Anybody remember what kind of line we're going to get on this one here? Vertical. It's going to be a vertical line, straight up and down. As a matter of fact, it's going to go right through 0. Notice I'm also using a solid line because it does have an equal sign. Now there is no top or bottom when we have a vertical line. So where am I going to shade? To the left or to the right of the line? Which one? Left. Well, it says the x values have to be greater than 0. Where are they greater than 0? To the left or to the right? To the right. So we're going to shade to the right. Very light. All right, so now we got to dig through there and see if we can find out where the regions overlap each other. Where do all 3 colors overlap? Be real careful here. All right, so it looks like it's going to be right in this area right here. This is where all 3 intersect or meet. So that darkened area is going to be where all the solutions are to all 3 of these inequalities. It satisfies all 3. Anything that's not within that shaded area would not satisfy all 3 inequalities. Might satisfy 1 or 2 of them, but not all 3. All right, so that takes care of number 8. 3 inequalities all in one graph. All right, number 9 has 4 inequalities. I'm going to let you give this one a shot on your own. I want you to graph all 4 of these, and then we're going to darken in where all 4 would overlap each other. All right, Mauritius graphed the first one for us. y is greater than or equal to x minus 4. It's less than to the bottom. Less than is to the bottom, yeah. There you go, that's the bottom. All right, there it is. There's our second one. That is the second one. Here comes the third one. There you go. Vertical line through the -2. There it is. And this time there is no top or bottom, so it should be shading to the right. That's where the x values are greater than or equal to a -2. All right, we got one more to go here. And the last one we got to graph here is y is less than or equal to 3. Okay, this time it's a horizontal line. There you go. Now we got this big ugly mess. All right, now we got one last thing to do. Hey, come on up. I need you to darken in the area where all 4 overlap. It's kind of hard to tell with ours. Hopefully you can find it in there. All right, where do all 4 overlap each other? Darken in that part. All right, so that's that funny looking shape there. There you go. Everybody see that? Right in this area here. That's where all the solutions are to this system. All of these order pairs that satisfy all 4 inequalities, and only those order pairs within that shaded area. All right. So obviously, the more inequalities we have, the harder it is to find that overlap. All right, we got one last thing here that we need to look at. Down at the bottom of your page, number 10, it says, what system of inequality could be used to create this graph and solutions? Now, it's kind of hard to tell on yours because the copy machine doesn't do a very good job of doing that shading for you. So let's look at this one up here on the board. The first one, the blue one. The blue one. First thing I got to do is decide what kind of inequality symbol do I need. Do I need a less than or do I need a greater than? Well, look at the shading of that line. Notice it's shaded to the bottom. And because it's shaded to the bottom, what kind of inequality should I use? Less than. So we know we should be a less than. Next thing I'm going to look for is to see if I need an equal sign. Do I need an equal sign on this one? Yes. We know that because it's a solid line. So I have y is less than or equal to something. To find that something, I need the slope, and I also need the y-intercept. I think the y-intercept is pretty obvious here. The y-intercept is a what? 2. Positive 2. So there's the y-intercept. The last thing I need is the slope, the number that goes in front of the x. Can anybody tell what that slope is? 2? No, not negative 2. Negative 2. We know it's negative because it's going down. So there's our first inequality. That would represent the blue line. Now I need one for the red one. All right, so here we go. Again, look at the shading. Notice the shading is to the bottom of the line. which means we're going to need a less than. Do I need an equal on this one? Not this time, because this time it's a dotted line. So the next thing I'm going to need is the slope and the Y-intercept. Let's start with the Y-intercept. Y-intercept on this one is going to be a -1. So over here we should have -1. Next thing I need is the slope of the line. What's the slope of that line? -1/2. So this is the system that matches this inequality. So we could go forwards and backwards here. So on the test on Thursday, I may give you the graph and ask you to write the inequalities, or I may give you the inequalities and ask you to give me the graph. So just make sure you can work up both ways. All right, so that takes us to the last page. The last page.